Honestly, I expected people to just sit back and do absolutely nothing, but there has been quite a lot of noise in the X11 space as of late. So you have Wayback. This is a way to take X11 environments and then run them on this little Wayland shim that is running X Wayland, and basically using X Wayland as a way to run the entire X11 environment. This is still very alpha. It doesn't support multiple monitors yet. It's something that sometime down the line is going to be really cool, but right now is kind of rough to use. There is the whole X Libre thing, which has been packaged in a bunch of small distros and is present in third-party repos for some bigger distros. This is a fork of the Xorg server, which is a fork of X386, which is not a fork of X386, but a rename of that project when SGCS took a branch of it proprietary. The history of X11 is very messy, the history of Xorg is very messy, but considering that X Libre has kind of burnt a lot of bridges with distro maintainers, I don't expect that to be adopted in the main repos for pretty much any of these major distros. It could happen. Hey, I could be wrong. I just don't see it happening. Also, the Xorg line is a mess of unmaintainable code that nobody wants to touch, that supports hardware that nobody is using, that no distro support, and frankly, I can see why, even if you want to keep X11 around, you might want to move off of that very long-running line of software. And there is absolutely nothing stopping you from just making your own X11 server. You can just do this. Xorg isn't X11. It has been the main way we do X11 on Linux for a long time, but other servers have existed in the past, other servers could exist in the future, and there is a new server that people are talking about. And especially when your goal isn't to support the last 40 or so years of use cases, this is not an impossible feat, and given enough time, given enough knowledge, you might be able to make something better. I don't know if that's what Phoenix is going to do, but it's certainly aiming to do so. And this right here is the Phoenix repo. So it's still a relatively new project. It's only been around for about, what, 5-ish months? Yeah, about 5-ish months. So there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of improvements to be made. But you know what? Before anyone says anything, this isn't a Rust rewrite. It's a Zig rewrite. It's not actually a rewrite of Xorg. It is taking X11 and then going in a completely different route. But, you know, people love to throw around the word rewrite. This is likely a few years from being seriously usable, and probably a few years after that to get to the state the developer really wants to be in, at least if they continue working by themselves, which is currently what is happening, as this is relatively new, and people only recently found out about it. So, the current state is Phoenix is not ready to be used yet. At the moment, it can render simple applications that do GLX, EGL, or Vulkan graphics fully hardware accelerated, nested in an existing X server. So, nesting it inside of Xorg or X Libre or any of these other servers that might exist. Running Phoenix nested will only be a supported mode until Phoenix has progressed more and can run real-world applications. So, having it nested is not going to be a long-term thing, but for the sake of testing, it does make it easy to test. And speaking of development, who is the developer? So, most notably, they've worked on a project called GPU Screen Recorder. This is a very popular tool if you want to use something that's kind of like Shadowplay. This is basically the best option we have on Linux, and you can run it through X Wayland, but it's not intended to be run on Wayland. It really is tied to how X11 works, and to make it really work properly, you kinda need to be on X11, at least without a bunch of new protocols being added to Wayland. And from my understanding, they have in the past made some of the more useful changes to X Libre, but at least going by what they say in this write-up for Phoenix, I assume the reason why they're doing this instead of trying to improve that project is the Xorg line is kind of a lost cause. To get it to the state that they would want it to be in, it would effectively be a rewrite anyway. So, here are the goals. Simplicity. Be a simpler Xserve than Xorg server by only supporting a subset of the X11 protocol, the features that are needed by relatively modern applications, anything written and updated within the last 20 or so years. This includes all software that you use, even old GTK2 applications. Only relatively modern hardware made and updated in the last 15 to 20 years, which support Linux DRM and Mesa GBM will be supported, and no server driver interface like the Xorg server, just like how Wayland compositors work. So you're going to see this come up quite a bit. There is a lot of inspiration for this new server for how Wayland is currently working. Rather than doing things the traditional Xorg way, which made sense at the time, taking advantage of new, modern approaches that may not work on old hardware, may not support 30-year-old use cases, but will be, hopefully, a better approach to doing things into the future. Security. Applications will be isolated from each other by default and can only interact with other applications either through a GUI prompt asking for permission, such as with screen recorders where it will only be allowed to record the screen specified or by explicitly giving the application permission before launched. However, not taking the Wayland approach where applications need to worry about supporting this, where it's going to be this weird, broken method which a lot of things took a very long time to go and support. This will not break existing clients, as clients won't receive errors when they try to access more than they need. They will instead receive dummy data. So still providing that X11 way of accessing the screen, of trying to record, but permission controlling it at the server level. Applications that rely on global hotkeys should work as long as a modifier key is pressed, such as Control, Shift, Alt, and Super. If an application needs global hotkeys without pressing a modifier key, then it needs to be given permission to do so, perhaps by adding a command to run a program with more X11 permissions. There will be an option to disable this to make the Xserve behave like Xorg, so permissions baked in, but not forcing them on the user in cases where, for whatever reason, they don't want them to be there, whether it's system automation or something else like that. So again, taking some of the stuff that we've learnt from the Wayland approach and then applying that to the X11 model and not breaking the traditional approach. This is the kind of stuff that is not fundamentally impossible to add into something like Xorg, but any change to it is going to break decades upon decades of use cases. So in many ways, you might be better off starting from something where currently nothing really works except some very basic things, and then building up support over time and making sure things are the way you want them to be from the very start. Improvements for modern technology. Support for modern hardware better than the Xorg server, such as proper support for multiple monitors, different refresh rates, mixed variable refresh rate, not a single frame buffer for the entire collection of displays, and technology like HDR. Now, this is something where if it gets done, I will be very, very impressed. The author thinks it is not impossible, and what made it difficult with Xorg was, again, years upon years of software where you needed to make sure it stayed supported, so you couldn't go and make a major change to go and support HDR. He believes that by doing this from the start, by being willing to drop those really old use cases, you can make this happen. Improved graphics handling, no tearing by default, and a built-in compositor. Again, taking inspiration from the Wayland model. The compositor will get disabled if the user runs an external compositor, such as PyCon for example, or if the client runs a full-screen application. The goal is to also have lower vsync/compositor latency than the Xorg server. New standards will be developed and documented, such as per monitor DPI as render properties. Applications can use this property to scale the content to the specified DPI for the monitor they are on, and of course, extending the X11 protocol. Now, because everything is going towards Wayland, one thing you're also going to need is Wayland compatibility. So like how we have Wayland to run X11 stuff on Wayland, something to run Wayland stuff on X11. This is something where there are already projects that are trying to make this happen, things like 12 to 11, Wayland X, and RxWL. But the idea here is to have something baked directly into the server. Nested display server. Being able to run Phoenix nested in the X11 or Wayland with hardware acceleration, this is not only useful for debugging Phoenix, but also for developers who want to test their window manager or compositor without restarting the display server they are running. Being able to run Phoenix under Wayland as an alternative to X-Wayland server would be a good option. Now, it was mentioned earlier that being able to nest it is not something that is necessarily going to stick around long term, so whether or not this actually stays as one of the goals is hard to say at this point. As for the things that are explicitly not goals, it is not trying to replace the Xorg server. It probably can replace it for the majority of people, but it's not trying to replace it on old hardware, it's not trying to replace it for really legacy software, it's trying to be something that is still usable long into the future, whilst actually being maintainable by getting rid of all that garbage that, frankly, no one is actually running. It's just trying to support modern, full-color displays. No monochrome monitors, nothing like that. If you want to have some sort of middle layer that does the conversion, whatever you want to do like that, sure, you can do so, but actually directly supporting it, no, it's just not a goal here. Multiple X11 screens. Now, screens and displays are not the same thing in X11. Multiple monitors will be supported. That is multiple displays. An X11 screen is basically the collection of monitors. There's various weird setups you can do that you might want to have this, but for most people, you are never going to touch this. No exclusive access. This is where you can let the client, the application, take full control over the X11 server. This is not something the majority of people are ever going to use, and doesn't need to be there. Again, if you want that, go and use Xorg. No support for Endian swap client and server. This was dropped by Xorg about 2 years ago, so even people on Xorg aren't actually using this. Indirect or remote GLX. There are better ways to do remote desktop streaming nowadays. This is not the way you want to do it. This is not going to be supported. Again, if you really want the X11 method of doing this, just use Xorg. Just use X-Wayland, it's going to be supported there. Now you might be wondering, why even bother doing any of this? Why not just give up and just use Wayland? Well, the reason is pretty self-serving. So I mentioned earlier that the developer also makes GPU screen recorder, and this just doesn't work on Wayland, and it's not just GPU screen recorder that doesn't work properly, you can technically use it. There is a bunch of other applications where there is just no movement on the protocols they need, and even when there is movement, there's still other protocols that need to be there, and a lot of these things are just not coming together. So if Wayland isn't going to move, you might as well just build something better off of the thing that did work. Now, most things you use are probably going to work great on Wayland, but that doesn't matter if the one thing you really, really need doesn't. Speaking on GPU screen recorder, if it were to only use the Wayland protocol, then it wouldn't work at all. It has to rely on X-Wayland, and even in that case, it faces many issues and has to rely on undefined behaviors in each Wayland compositor, which may or may not work. Some things are implemented by bypassing the Wayland compositor and interfacing with the Linux kernel directly with root access instead. One of these things where it needs to bypass the Wayland compositor and can't use X-Wayland either is global shortcuts. Despite there being an XDG desktop portal protocol for global shortcuts, it's mostly useless. It only works somewhat on KDE Plasma. The protocol for global shortcuts is vague, and it's implemented differently in incompatible ways in every Wayland compositor. And in Hyperland, for example, it's implemented in a way where it's not usable for graphical applications. It's also not implemented at all for a large number of compositors. So it is actually present in GNOME, but they don't have the other side of it available that hooks in to actually go and configure the global shortcuts. So with KDE, it will go and actually add all of the shortcuts into your shortcut configuration menu that you go and, modify your system shortcuts, things like that. On Hyperland, you got to go and modify your Hyperland config file. On GNOME, well, the portal is there, but not the configuration side. And then wroots, well, yeah, good luck with that one. This is one of the main reasons why you don't see applications supporting global shortcuts on Wayland. I did see it from Chromium, but that's, I think, the only one I've ever actually noticed it from. As for GPU screen recorder, it kinda needs it to make it useful. A lot of screen recording applications, you really want global shortcuts to be there to actually be useful. No one wants to go and, click on a thing and do that. You have a keyboard here, let me just start the recording with my keyboard. Let alone push to talk in things like Discord. This is not an issue in X11, as X11 doesn't have a protocol for global shortcuts. It instead allows applications to freely listen to keyboard inputs and implement it however they want. Note, this can be done while preventing keyloggers. So as I mentioned earlier, the author wants to build a permission system directly into the server. Even if I were to make my own Wayland compositor and fix these issues, it would need to break the philosophy of Wayland. It would basically require it to work like X11, and that compositor would be the only compositor to ever work with my applications, and then if you wanted to have other things support that, is just not gonna happen. That would tie users to a specific desktop experience, as on Wayland, the Wayland compositor implementation is tied to the user experience, the desktop environment. It would be no different than making a new X11 server, except with a new X11 server, it works with every window manager and desktop environment and doesn't break existing applications or require them to rewrite anything, assuming they've been updated in the last 20 or so years. In general, you can't just write software that works with every Wayland compositor, you need to target specific Wayland compositors. A lot of software that claim to be Wayland software are actually Kwin, KDE Plasma, wroots, Sway, River, etc., Mutter, GNOME, specific software. You can throw in things like Smithy as well, and Mia, and Louvre when that eventually gets off the ground, and yeah, even though there are these shared protocols, you do have some sort of, how would you say it, I guess, protocol implementation differences between the different setups. Even though they might all be claiming to be on spec, there's going to be some very subtle differences with the implementations where, like with the portal example, which is not a Wayland protocol issue, technically a lot of these do implement the portal, but the way they do it makes it weirdly different. The main issue with Wayland is not a technical one, but in its philosophy. X11 is mechanism over policy, while Wayland is policy over mechanism. On X11, you have simple but powerful constructs that can be used for a wide range of things, while on Wayland, each feature is designed specifically to what the Wayland compositor developers had in mind, specifically for their Wayland compositor, no more, no less. This is also the reason why it takes far longer for a decision to be made in the Wayland protocol than in the X11 protocol, several years versus 2 months. There have actually been Wayland protocols that took very short amount of time. However, there is also multiple that have gone pretty close to a decade, and others which haven't yet, but I do expect to go for about a decade. And the Wayland solution or desktop portal solution ends up being less flexible and oftentimes 1,000 times more complex for applications to implement. Almost all the issues people have had with the Xorg server are not issues with X11 protocol, but with the Xorg server. Some others, such as security, are minor issues that are easily solvable without requiring any changes to the X11 protocol. So I wish the developer the best of luck, because this is a big project, and even if it does happen, even though projects like Xlibri exist, this isn't going to change the direction that desktops are going. That doesn't mean, though, that you have to go in that direction. The nice thing about open source is if you don't like the direction things are going, you can just say, okay, I'm going to do my thing over here. I don't care. It's my computer. I can install the software I want. So hopefully this project goes well, and hopefully we actually have another proper X11 server that doesn't have 30 plus years of craft. But what do you think? Do you think X11 is going to rise like a phoenix from the ashes, or do you think it's going to just burn out and this isn't actually going to go anywhere? I'd like to know your thoughts down below. So go like the video if you like the video, go subscribe if you want to subscribe, and if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribe Stelly Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I hope it goes well. I want to see more cool things.